What drives a person to commit the unthinkable? And what do their final words reveal when the end is near? In this chilling journey, we're diving into the stories of women who were executed in the United States, not just their crimes, but their final meals, their last statements, and the quiet moments before their lives ended. These are the final chapters of some of the most haunting criminal cases in American history. Let's begin. Velma Barfield, North Carolina's death row granny. From the outside, Velma Barfield looked like a sweet, silver-haired Southern woman. But behind the glasses and gentle smile was a calculating killer, one who turned domestic caregiving into a lethal trap. Between 1971 and 1978, Velma became infamous for weaving death into everyday meals. Her weapon of choice? Arsenic. Slipped into food and drinks here, silently devastating her victims. Among the dead were her own mother, Lillian Bullard, and an elderly couple she was supposed to be looking after, Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. Then came John Henry Lee, whose wife was also under Velma's care. And finally, her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor. It was Taylor's death that unraveled the web. An autopsy exposed high levels of arsenic, leading investigators straight to Velma. She eventually confessed to 4 murders, though she was only prosecuted for Taylor's. While on death row, Velma underwent a remarkable transformation. She became deeply religious and began ministering to other inmates, leading many to argue for clemency. But the courts were unmoved. On November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield made history, not for her crimes, but for becoming the first woman executed in the U.S. after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. As she prepared to die by lethal injection, she offered these final words. "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." Her final request was simple, almost childlike: cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. Carla Faye Tucker, the pickaxe killer of Texas. The night of June 13, 1983 started as a high-fuel drug binge and ended in a double homicide that would shock Texas. Carla Faye Tucker, 23 at the time, and her boyfriend, Danny Garrett, had one goal: steal a motorcycle from Jerry Dean's Houston apartment. But once inside, things spiraled out of control. Armed with a hammer and a pickaxe, the couple brutally murdered Jerry. Then, as if that wasn't enough, they discovered a woman hiding under the bed. She had stayed the night. Carla pulled her out and killed her too. The murders were ferocious, and when the story broke, so was the public outrage. 5 weeks later, the couple was arrested. Both were convicted and sentenced to death. Garrett never saw the execution chamber. He died in 1993 from liver disease. Carla's case, however, kept moving. What made Carla Faye Tucker's story stand out wasn't just the crime, it was what happened after. She became a national figure while on death row, speaking openly about her past, her remorse, and her faith. She captivated the public and even gained support from some unexpected allies, including religious leaders and even politicians. Despite numerous appeals, Carla's fate was sealed. On February 3, 1998, she was executed by lethal injection. She had requested a modest final meal: a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. Her final words were not just for the state or the prison staff, but for the families of the victims. "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this. Baby, I love you. Ron, give Peggy a hug for me. Everybody has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Baggett, thank all of you so much. You have been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." Judy Buenoano, Florida's Black Widow. Judy Buenoano wore many faces: a grieving widow, a devoted mother, a loyal partner. But behind that quiet exterior was a calculated killer who used poison as her signature and money as her motive. Her deadly trail began in 1971 when her husband, James Goodyear, died suddenly in Orlando. At first, no one questioned it. The death appeared natural, no foul play, no red flags. But years later, forensic tests would uncover the truth. Arsenic had slowly, silently killed him. Then came Bobby Joe Morris, the man Judy moved in with not long after her husband's death. He met the same fate in 1978, another unexplained illness, another dose of arsenic. another insurance payout. But the most haunting twist came in 1980. Judy took her paraplegic son, Michael, out canoeing on a quiet Florida river. The canoe capsized. Michael, who relied on leg and arm braces and wasn't wearing a life jacket, drowned. Judy called it an accident. Authorities believed her for a while. Then in 1983, her latest boyfriend, John Gentry, survived a car explosion. The blast should have killed him, but it triggered something else, a full-blown investigation into Judy's life, and what police uncovered was straight out of a dark thriller. She had been slipping Gentry what she said were vitamins. In reality, they were laced with arsenic and paraformaldehyde. Suspicious investigators exhumed the bodies of her previous lovers. One by one, the toxicology reports confirmed the horror. They'd all been poisoned. The motive was chillingly clear. Judy collected hefty life insurance checks after each death. On March 30, 1998, Judy Buenoano sat in Florida's electric chair. She made no apologies. She offered no final words. Her last meal? A surprisingly elegant request. Steamed broccoli and asparagus, tomato wedges, strawberries, and a cup of hot tea with lemon. With her silent exit, Judy became known as Florida's first female executed in over 150 years, a woman who lived off death and left a trail of buried secrets behind her. Betty Lou Beets, the Wishing Well Killer of Texas, Cedar Creek Lake, Texas, 1983. Betty Lou Beets called the police to report her fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beets, missing. She sounded worried, but behind her voice was something far more sinister, a script she had written in advance. What the police didn't know was that Jimmy Don was already dead, killed with 2 bullets from a .38 caliber pistol. According to her own son, Robert Branson, Betty Lou had made her intentions clear. She was going to kill her husband. She told Robert to leave the house. When he returned 2 hours later, Jimmy Don's lifeless body was waiting. But the plan didn't stop there. Together, mother and son buried the body in a makeshift grave, right there in the front yard beneath a filled-in wishing well. Then Betty Lou made her call to the authorities, feigning confusion and concern. The next day, she even planted Jimmy Don's heart medication in his fishing boat, which she and Robert abandoned in the lake, a staged scene to support her lie. Police spent weeks dredging the water, searching for a body that was never there. It wasn't until 1985, when investigators searched her property, that the truth was unearthed, literally. They found Jimmy Don's body in the wishing well, and to everyone's shock, buried in her garage was the corpse of Doyle Wayne Barker, her fourth husband. He had been shot with the same weapon. Although she was never charged for Barker's death, the evidence in Jimmy Don's murder sealed her fate. Betty Lou Beets was sentenced to death. She showed no remorse, offered no explanation, and when the time came, she declined both a last meal and a final statement. On February 24, 2000, she was executed by lethal injection. A silent end for a woman who buried the truth in her backyard, twice. Christina Riggs, the nurse who chose death over life. In the quiet suburb of Sherwood, Arkansas, Christina Riggs seemed like an ordinary nurse trying to hold things together after a tough divorce. But beneath the surface, something was unraveling. And when it broke, it shattered more than just her own life. Riggs had made a decision, one that would leave a community in shock and a courtroom in disbelief. She didn't just want to end her own life. She wanted to take her 2 young children with her. In 1997, inside the walls of her home, Riggs used her medical training in the darkest way imaginable. She'd stolen drugs from the hospital where she worked, among them potassium chloride, commonly used in lethal injections. Her first target was her son, Justin. She injected him with the drug, but the pain was excruciating. The potassium caused his veins to burn from the inside out. The dose didn't kill him quickly, and Riggs smothered him to end it. Her daughter Shelby was next. This time, she didn't use drugs. She simply smothered the child with her own hands. After the murders, Riggs gently laid the bodies of her children on her bed, covered them with a blanket, and wrote several suicide notes. She then attempted to take her own life with the same stolen drugs, but her plan failed. Her mother found her unconscious and called for help. What followed in court was just as disturbing. Riggs refused to let her attorneys argue for her life. She wanted the death penalty. She was ready to die, she said, and nothing could change that. On May 2, 2000, Christina Riggs was executed by lethal injection. Her final words were haunting. "No words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies as I always intended." Her last meal was strangely comforting, almost like a family dinner. A supreme pizza, salad, fried okra, cherry limeade, and a strawberry shortcake. But there would be no comfort for those left behind. Wanda Jean Allen, a love story that ended in blood. Wanda Jean Allen's story begins in Oklahoma, a troubled woman with a turbulent past and a gun in her purse. Her first brush with fatal violence happened in 1981 when she shot and killed Dedra Pettis, a woman who was both her childhood friend and her romantic partner. She was convicted but served just 2 years behind bars. By 1988, Wanda had a new partner, Gloria Jean Leathers. But history has a way of repeating itself when lessons go unlearned. On December 2nd, the couple had a heated argument at a grocery store. Gloria walked away. Wanda didn't. Fueled by rage, Wanda followed her to the police station. As Gloria stepped out of her car in the parking lot, Wanda pulled a gun and opened fire. Gloria was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. She died 3 days later. This time, there would be no light sentence. Wanda Jean Allen was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. She spent the next 12 years on death row as her legal team fought for clemency, pointing to her low IQ and troubled upbringing. But the state said no. On January 11, 2001, Wanda faced her execution. As the chemicals began to flow, she turned to her attorney and with a soft smile spoke her final words. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." There were no grand final feasts for Wanda, just a bag of chips. Sometimes, the simplest choices echo the loudest. Marilyn K. Plants, Love, Greed, and a Fatal Betrayal. It was a hot August night in 1988 when James Earl Plants was found inside his smoldering pickup truck in a quiet corner of Midwest City, Oklahoma. To the untrained eye, it looked like a tragic accident, maybe a car fire gone wrong. But what the investigators uncovered would shock even seasoned detectives. This wasn't an accident. It was murder. Brutal, calculated, and personal. James had been ambushed inside his own home. As he walked through the door, 2 men were already waiting, armed with baseball bats. The attackers didn't hesitate. They beat him viciously. During the assault, James cried out in desperation, screaming his wife's name, "Marilyn!" But Marilyn didn't run to help. She didn't stop the violence. She stayed in another room, listening as her husband was beaten nearly to death. Why? Because she was the one who planned it all. Marilyn K. Plants had recruited the 2 men, William Bryson and Clinton McKimble, as part of a cold-blooded life insurance scheme. The promise of money was enough to turn her into a conspirator in her husband's murder. After the savage beating, the 2 men loaded James into his own truck, drove him to a remote road, and set it ablaze, hoping the fire would erase any trace of what really happened. But justice has a way of catching up. All 3 were eventually arrested. And while the men who carried out the attack were punished, it was Marilyn, the mastermind, who was sentenced to death. On May 1st, 2001, Marilyn Plants lay on the execution table. Her voice was calm. She thanked her loved ones, addressed the witnesses, and spoke with conviction. "What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world. And I just want y'all to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And if y'all want to see me again, you must be born again." Her final meal was as excessive as her crime, a feast of Mexican food. Chicken taco salad, Mexican pizza, enchiladas, soft tacos, cinnamon twist, pecan pie, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. Lois Nadian Smith, a 4th of July execution. The fireworks weren't the only thing that exploded on July 4th, 1982. That night, 21-year-old Cindy Bailey took what would be the final ride of her life. Picked up by her ex-boyfriend Greg Smith, his mother Lois Nadian Smith, and another woman. But this wasn't a reunion. It was a trap. Lois had heard rumors that Cindy was involved in a plot to kill her son. Whether those rumors were true or not didn't matter. Lois believed them, and she wanted revenge. During the drive, Lois confronted Cindy. When Cindy denied everything, Lois snapped. She choked her, stabbing her in the throat before dragging her to an ex-husband's house in the town of Gans. There, the cruelty escalated. Lois forced Cindy into a recliner, tormenting her with a pistol while her son reloaded the gun. Laughing, Lois jumped on her victim's neck, then fired shot after shot into Cindy's chest and head. Cold, calculated, final. Lois Nadine Smith was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Years later, facing her execution, Lois showed a rare glimpse of remorse. She turned to the family of her victim and said, "I want to say I'm sorry for the pain and loss I've caused you. I ask that you forgive me. You must forgive to be forgiven." Her last meal was a Southern-style send-off: barbecued ribs, crispy onion rings, strawberry banana cake, and a cherry limeade. Linda Lionblock, a deadly encounter in a Walmart parking lot. October 4th, 1993, a quiet afternoon in Opelika, Alabama, suddenly turned into a violent standoff. In the parking lot of a Walmart, Police Sergeant Roger Motley approached a parked car for what seemed like a routine check. Inside was George Sibley, and nearby his common-law wife, Linda Lionblock. Also in the car, Block's 9-year-old son, quietly watching from the back seat. Motley had questions about Sibley's driver's license. But what began as a simple inquiry escalated in a matter of seconds. Words were exchanged, tension soared, and then bullets were flying. A shootout erupted in broad daylight. When the dust settled, Simon Motley lay fatally wounded. Though the exact identity of the shooter was never confirmed, both Linda Block and George Sibley were found guilty of capital murder. Their anti-government ideology and refusal to recognize the court's authority only intensified the drama around the trial. Years later, on May 10, 2002, Linda Lionblock faced execution at Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility. She was the first woman the state had executed in 45 years, and notably, the last person in the U.S. to be put to death in the electric chair without being given the option to choose lethal injection. There were no last words, no final meal, just silence, and the electric hum of justice carried out. Aileen Wuornos, the woman behind the monster. Her name would become infamous, a portrait of rage, trauma, and cold-blooded murder that divided a nation. Between November 1989 and November 1990, Aileen Wuornos, a hitchhiking sex worker along Florida's highways, gunned down 7 men, each of them strangers who picked her up off the side of the road. It began with Richard Charles Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics shop owner. Aileen claimed he raped her and that killing him was an act of self-defense. But what followed didn't match the story of a one-time act of survival. David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, whose body was never recovered, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, Walter Antonio. Each met the same end: multiple gunshot wounds, bodies dumped or missing. By the time the police caught up with her in January 1991, Aileen was on the run. Witnesses had spotted her and her girlfriend ditching one of the victim's cars, and the net closed quickly around her. Convicted for 6 of the 7 murders, Wuornos never asked forgiveness and seemed to embrace the chaos that followed her. Her trial and execution drew headlines, documentaries, and debates about mental health, abuse, and the American justice system. When asked what she wanted for her final meal, she declined any special request. All she asked for was a cup of coffee. On October 9, 2002, she was executed by lethal injection. Her final words: "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." Strange, prophetic, disturbing. Aileen Wuornos left the world exactly as she had lived in it, on her own terms, in her own reality. Frances Newton, a family silenced. It was one of the most chilling crime scenes Houston had ever seen. Inside a quiet apartment in April 1987, authorities discovered the bodies of 3 people: a father, a young child, and a toddler. Each had been shot at close range. The victims: Adrian Newton, his 7-year-old son Alton, and his 20-month-old daughter Farah. But what stunned investigators most wasn't just the brutality, it was who they suspected was behind it. Frances Newton, wife to Adrian, mother to Alton and Farah, quickly became the center of the investigation. And what the detectives found beneath the surface told a dark and twisted story. Just weeks before the murders, Frances had taken out life insurance policies on her husband and daughter. Each was valued at $50,000, and in every one, she was listed as the sole beneficiary. The timing was no coincidence. Prosecutors claimed she had set the entire thing in motion, planning the murders using a pistol that belonged to a man she had been secretly seeing. After the killings, she hid the weapon in a relative's house, a key piece of evidence that would later seal her fate. Frances told a different story. She insisted a drug dealer had committed the murders, but for the jury, the puzzle pieces fit too neatly, and in 1988, she was convicted and sentenced to death. For over 17 years on death row, Frances Newton never stopped declaring her innocence. Her case drew widespread attention. Some believed the evidence wasn't solid enough. Others believed justice had already been served. But on September 14, 2005, her time ran out. She declined a final meal. She offered no final words. That night, Frances Newton became the first black woman executed in Texas in over a century. Teresa Lewis, a plot hatched in the aisles of Walmart. It started like something out of a Southern crime novel, but what unfolded was shockingly real. In 2002, Teresa Lewis was a wife and stepmother living in rural Virginia. But behind closed doors, she was leading a secret life, tangled in drugs, betrayal, and manipulation. At a Walmart in Danville, Teresa met two younger men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller. What began as a casual friendship quickly turned physical. Teresa became intimately involved with both of them, and within weeks, she had a deadly idea. Her husband, Julian Lewis, and his son, Charles, both insured for hundreds of thousands of dollars, stood in the way of her future. Teresa wanted the money, and she had found the men to help her take it. On the night of October 30th, 2002, she left the back door to her home unlocked. Schallenberger crept into the bedroom and shot Julian as he slept. Fuller went into another room and used a shotgun to kill Charles. Teresa waited in the kitchen while it happened, calm, composed, and even after the shots were fired, she waited 45 more minutes before calling for help. When authorities arrived, Julian was clinging to life. Before he died, he managed to say, "My wife knows who done this to me." That single sentence destroyed her cover story. In court, the judge didn't mince words. He called Teresa the head of this serpent, the architect behind the murders. Though she hadn't pulled the trigger, she had orchestrated every move. On death row, Teresa's case stirred public debate. Some pointed to her low IQ and mental health issues as reasons to reconsider the sentence. But the state stood firm. Before her execution on September 23, 2010, Teresa requested a final meal: 2 fried chicken breasts, sweet peas with butter, a Dr. Pepper, and apple pie. As she faced death, she turned to her stepdaughter, the girl she hadn't plotted against, and said, "I just want Kathy to know that I love you, and I'm very sorry." Then silence. Kimberly McCarthy, Sugar, Violence, and a Diamond Ring. July 20, 1997 began like any other summer day in Lancaster, Texas. But for 71-year-old Dorothy Booth, it would end in unthinkable horror. Kimberly McCarthy, her neighbor, knocked on the door with a familiar and harmless request. Could she borrow some sugar? Dorothy let her in. That small act of kindness would cost her everything. Once inside, McCarthy launched a brutal and calculated attack. Armed with a butcher knife, she stabbed the elderly woman 5 times. Then, using a heavy candelabrum, she beat her until the life drained from her body. But the violence didn't stop there. McCarthy took a knife and severed one of Dorothy's fingers to steal her diamond wedding ring. She grabbed Dorothy's purse and keys, left in her Mercedes-Benz, and drove off into the night. The motive? Crack cocaine. She pawned the ring and used the money to fund her addiction. But Kimberly McCarthy wasn't careful. She used Dorothy's credit cards at a local liquor store. She was found carrying Booth's ID, and the murder weapon found in McCarthy's own home had the victim's DNA all over it. The case was airtight. In 1998, she was convicted of murder. Years later, on June 26, 2013, Kimberly McCarthy became the 500th person executed by the state of Texas since the death penalty was reinstated. By then, Texas had stopped honoring last meal requests, so she got whatever the prison cafeteria was serving that day. She had no special feast, but she did have final words. "This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." Suzanne Basso, a carnival, a con, and a fatal scam. Louis Buddy Musso was a 59-year-old man with a gentle heart and a childlike mind. He lived independently in New Jersey, never realizing that a chance encounter at a church carnival would lead him straight into the hands of a killer. That killer was Suzanne Basso. After a year of letters, calls, and promises, she convinced Buddy to move to Texas. He thought he was building a new life. But to Suzanne, Buddy was worth more dead than alive. As soon as he arrived, Basso tried to take over his Social Security payments. But when the government said no, she made other plans. Buddy's final days were a horror story. Over 5 days, he was beaten relentlessly with belts, fists, and blunt objects. When his body was found in a ditch by a jogger, it was barely recognizable. The autopsy revealed hundreds of bruises. His skull had been fractured. The cause of death, blunt force trauma. Police soon uncovered the truth. Basso had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Buddy, including one that paid extra if his death was violent. Investigators also discovered a suspicious will, one that conveniently left everything Buddy owned to her. It didn't take long for the web to unravel. Suzanne Basso was convicted of murder and sentenced to die. On February 5, 2014, she was executed by lethal injection. She didn't ask for a final meal. She had no parting words, just silence and the weight of what she had done. Lisa Ann Coleman, a child starved, a life destroyed. When emergency responders entered the cramped apartment in Arlington, Texas, on July 26, 2004, they found 9-year-old Davante Williams lying lifeless. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't moving. And by the time paramedics reached him, it was already too late. He weighed just 35 pounds, the size of an average 3-year-old. His body was a map of pain, over 250 distinct injuries, bruises, welts, scars. Ligature marks on his wrists and ankles told a grim story. He had been tied up over and over again, isolated, beaten, starved. Davante died from a fatal combination of untreated pneumonia and severe malnutrition. But the real cause? The people who were supposed to protect him. Lisa Ann Coleman lived in that home. She wasn't Davante's mother, but she was his mother's partner. And when the investigation began, the horrifying details emerged. Lisa confessed she and Marcella Williams, Davante's biological mother, had both tied him down and beaten him repeatedly, often with a belt. They locked him away, denied him food, and punished him for stealing scraps to survive. Prosecutors pursued the death penalty, and Lisa Coleman was convicted. Marcella, in a plea deal, received life in prison. On September 17, 2014, Lisa Ann Coleman was executed by lethal injection. Her final words were not bitter, not angry, just resolute. "I'm all right. Tell them I finished strong. God is good." But for those who heard the story, it was impossible not to wonder, how could anyone let a child suffer so long before it ended? Kelly Renee Gissendaner, A Southern Betrayal. It was a cold February evening in 1997 when Gregory Owen waited in the shadows outside a suburban Georgia home, holding a knife and a plan. When Douglas Gissendaner pulled into his driveway, he had no idea that death was minutes away. Owen, who was secretly involved with Douglas's wife, Kelly Renee Gissendaner, forced him into his own car and drove him to a remote wooded area. There, he struck Douglas in the head with a nightstick and stabbed him, over and over, in the neck and back. Then, Kelly arrived. Together, the pair set Douglas's car ablaze and left his body hidden among the trees, as if erasing the scene could erase the crime. Investigators soon pieced together the truth. Phone records, testimony, a clear motive. Kelly wanted her husband gone, not out of fear, but freedom. She wanted the house, the insurance money, and a life without him. When the case went to trial, prosecutors offered both Kelly and Owen the same plea deal, life in prison without parole for 25 years. Owen took it and turned on her. He testified that Kelly had planned the murder for months. She had even told him bluntly that killing Douglas was the only way forward. The jury agreed. In 1998, Kelly Renee Gissendaner was sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Georgia to receive that sentence in decades. As her execution date neared, support for clemency grew. Many saw her as reformed, a mother, a devout Christian, a woman who had changed. But the appeals failed. On September 30th, 2015, Kelly faced the lethal injection chamber. She cried. She sang Amazing Grace. She apologized to Douglas's family, not for the first time, but the last. Her final meal? a Tex-Mex spread, cheese dip and chips, fajita nachos, and a frosted diet lemonade. Her final act, a prayer. Lisa Marie Montgomery, a baby, a lie, and a brutal deception. December 16, 2004, a bitterly cold morning in the quiet town of Skidmore, Missouri. Bobby Jo Stinnett, 23 years old and 8 months pregnant, was at home tending to her dogs. She had no idea that death was knocking on her door, disguised as a customer. Lisa Marie Montgomery had driven all the way from Kansas, pretending to be interested in one of Bobby Jo's puppies. But her real motive was darker, unimaginable. Behind the smile and small talk, Lisa was harboring a fantasy, one she had carefully constructed online, where she told friends and family that she was pregnant. She wasn't. And to make it real, she needed a baby. Once inside Bobby Jo's home, Lisa attacked. She strangled her until she lost consciousness. Then, with a kitchen knife, she performed a crude cesarean, cutting the unborn baby from Bobby Jo's womb. In a final, horrific moment, Bobby Jo briefly regained consciousness and tried to fight back, but Lisa overpowered her. The young mother bled to death on her own living room floor. Hours later, Lisa called her husband and said she had just given birth at a nearby birthing center. She posed with the infant, smiled for photos, told people it was hers, but the lies unraveled quickly. The FBI tracked her down the very next day. The baby miraculously was alive and unharmed. Lisa Montgomery was arrested and charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a federal capital offense. In 2007, she was sentenced to die. Over the years, her case ignited fierce national debate: mental illness, trauma, justice. But in the eyes of the law, the brutality of her crime outweighed all else. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Marie Montgomery was executed by lethal injection, the first woman to be executed by the federal government in nearly 7 decades. When asked if she had any last words, she quietly replied, "No." Amber McLaughlin, stalking, murder, and a historic first. St. Louis, Missouri, 2003. Beverly Ginther had done everything she could to protect herself. She had taken out a restraining order. She had warned friends. She had changed her routine. But none of it stopped the threat that kept following her in the shadows: Scott McLaughlin. At the time, McLaughlin, who would later transition and become known as Amber, was obsessed with Beverly. Their past relationship had unraveled into harassment and escalating threats. One night, it finally turned fatal. Amber waited, watched, and when Beverly arrived home from work, she ambushed her, stabbing and killing her in cold blood. Then she dragged the body and left it near the banks of the Mississippi River like it was disposable. The horror didn't end there. It wasn't long before authorities pieced the case together and Amber McLaughlin was arrested. In 2006, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. But when it came time to decide on her punishment, the jury couldn't agree. The judge stepped in and imposed the death penalty, a rare move under Missouri law. Over the next 17 years on death row, McLaughlin transitioned from male to female and began living openly as Amber, a move that brought national attention to her case. She requested a final meal of a cheeseburger, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and peanut M&Ms. On January 3, 2023, after Missouri's governor denied her clemency plea, Amber McLaughlin became the first openly transgender person executed in the United States. In her final written statement, she offered these words: "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." But for Beverly's family, those words came nearly 2 decades too late.